The UK and Germany have signed this afternoon a treaty on trade and security, which the Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer says is the first of its kind between the two countries. The agreement, which will be known as the Kensington Treaty, spells out that a threat to one country will be seen as a threat to the other. That is being seen as an implicit warning to Russia. Putting all that into context, Germany is now the third largest supplier of military hardware to Ukraine, which has angered Moscow. Also in the deal, steps to strengthen commercial ties, a new partnership on scientific research, talk of improved rail connections, and crucially important to Sir Keir Starmer, there will be several measures Germany will adopt that may help stem the flow of illegal migration. Here's what the Prime Minister said after the signing.
It's a privilege to have you here today, particularly to sign this Kensington Treaty, which is a very special treaty because it's the first of its kind ever, if you can believe it, between our two countries. And I see it very much as evidence of the closeness of our relationship as it stands today, the strength of our values, the strength of our joint approach, but also very much as a statement of intent, a statement of our ambition to work ever more closely together, closest of allies, and whether that's on defence, security, trade, the economy, energy, covers so much in this treaty. And so this is a really historic signing of a historic agreement.
Sir Keir Starmer, historic indeed. It's the first time they've signed a treaty of this size since 1945, a point I put to our political correspondent, Rob Watson.
It is quite remarkable, and both sides are making a lot of that. It's worth bearing in mind, though, of course, Christian, that they have until recently both been members of the European Union, with all of the closeness that that entailed in terms of market cooperation, customs union, and they are, of course, both members, long-standing members of NATO, the main defence alliance. So, you know, there is a certain amount of spin going on with this, but absolutely it's a proper treaty, and what Downing Street is saying is that the 29 pages of the treaty essentially cover cooperation on issues ranging from migration and security to sort of business and commerce.
The signing ceremony has already taken place. It is usual in these circumstances for the teams to put everything on paper before the two men get together, so that's not entirely surprising. But they did just say during this sit down that there's an awful lot to discuss this afternoon. Where are the sticking points between the two sides?
Well, do you know, I think there's more. I think there's more lubrication than sticking between them. Actually, Christian, it's one of those moments where, you know, you have two leaders who are very much dealing with a similar set of problems. I mean, they're both very concerned about political challenges to their right. Both of them are rather concerned about the reliability of President Trump as an ally in dealing with issues such as Ukraine, and both men are, of course, worried about what they see as an aggressor in the Kremlin in the form of Vladimir Putin. I mean, that, of course, is what is helping, if you like, the rapprochement between Britain and the European Union as a unit and individual countries like Germany. It's sort of forcing them together. But I mean, I guess the things that they need to work out, you know, what exactly would happen in terms of a peacekeeping force if Russia and Ukraine were to agree a ceasefire. And, you know, yes, of course, there are sort of details to be worked out on how any increased European defence spending would be spread around allies like Germany and the UK.
Yeah, he has already announced, of course, Chancellor Merz, that they're going to up defence spending quite considerably, up to about 350 billion euros, but they are both now tied to this new target, core defence spending of 3.5%. Is it impossible for the two sides to get to that figure if they don't work closely together?
Well, I think it's certainly more difficult, right? And I think that the approach that they take is to try and make their arguments to their respective nations and fellow politicians. It's easier if you say, hey, look, it's not just us doing it, it's the Germans are doing it, or the Germans can say the Brits are doing it. So to that extent, if you're sort of saying it's a combined European effort, both on a sort of political front and a military front, absolutely that helps. I mean, are they going to be urging each other to spend more behind closed doors? No. I mean, you know, they both know the sort of fiscal limits they're up against, but absolutely, I mean, I think they see common purpose in being able to say to that, you know, to their voters in both countries, hey, you know, we're working together.
Rob Watson there. Well, while the two leaders were sitting down together this afternoon, the chair of the German Bundesbank was saying that if tariffs do materialise in August, then a recession in Germany next year cannot be ruled out. That's a point I was putting to our Berlin correspondent, Damien McGuinness. Sort of underlines why these connections in Europe are so important.
I think that's the main motivation behind this renewed boost for cooperation between Germany and the UK. Of course, you know, this is in the backdrop to Russia's full invasion of Ukraine, which Germany and most European countries view as a threat to themselves as well, potentially. But also, of course, the lack of certainty in relying on the US, and that's a real problem for Germany because traditionally German trade, German security all relies on the one hand on the US itself, but also on the idea that the rules-based international order works and it functions, and that's how the German economy keeps going because it trades with all sorts of countries, including China in particular. And the idea that this rules-based order is breaking down, and the idea particularly that you can't rely on the US fully anymore, is quite a traumatic idea for Germany, and that's really why the new Chancellor Friedrich Merz is really pushing to deepen European cooperation, not necessarily just with the EU, as we're seeing, you know, talk about cooperation with, in great detail with the UK. But, you know, as soon as Friedrich Merz was installed as Chancellor, the first thing he did, the next day, he went to France, he went to Poland, he then went on a joint trip to Ukraine, and now he's in the UK. So I think we're seeing a Chancellor here who's very keen on European cooperation. He sees that to a certain extent as a bulwark against the lack of reliability from the US.
The British side, of course, very happy to be more deeply integrated when it comes to defence, given the amount of spending that is ahead. But they do exact a price for it, and that is on migration. This agreement to crack down on warehousing of smugglers' boats and engines, it would surprise people, perhaps watching in Europe, Damien, that the police in Germany don't already have the powers to crack down on that.
I mean, if you look at this particular friendship treaty, I know it's being sold in the UK by the British government as a big deal on migration. In fact, it's just a couple of paragraphs in a 23-page document. So today's meeting is not really about migration primarily. It's really about defence and the economy. But yes, there are links between the UK and Germany when it comes to migration. One of them is a pledge by the German government to, they would say as well, crack down on irregular migration and people smuggling. And I think what we're seeing in Friedrich Merz is someone who talks very tough on migration, really in line with the UK government. And I think this is something they're going to be talking about, certainly. But if you're looking at the concrete measures, it's actually not really the main topic of conversation in this concrete treaty that we're talking about today. Of course, that could well change when the action plan comes out, because this treaty is really, almost like a document of intent. It's saying what they want to do. It's lots of pledges about deepening cooperation in every imaginable field, really, when it comes to international relations. It really comes down to what are the concrete steps going to be, and I think that'll be interesting to see. On the one hand, of course, with defence and the economy, but also whether there are going to be more concrete steps when it comes to migration as well.
Damien McGuinness. Of course, these two politicians are from different sides of the political track, but they both face similar pressures, which Anne McElvoy was telling me about, the executive editor at Politico.
I think it creates a different form of relationship when you have allied parties. Olaf Scholz was a Social Democrat, so essentially is Keir Starmer in the British tradition Labour. But Friedrich Merz is quite a flinty centre-right leader. As you've described it, they do have a number of things in common in terms of challenges, and the big one that you didn't mention, but I think drives a lot of the politics for both of them. In Britain, Keir Starmer has Reform coming after him, Reform UK, and Nigel Farage to his right. In Germany, Friedrich Merz is seeing that centre and centre-right that's been so powerful in German politics in the 30 or so years since I've been covering it, and before, from Helmut Kohl's era onwards of German unification. Christian democracy is under big threat from the rise of the AfD and the Alternative for Deutschland to the right, and even further right, one should say, than Reform UK in many of its positions.
Welcome to TeamSam TV, your channel for the latest news updates. Here, we break down the biggest stories from around the globe, covering everything from breaking news to politics. Whether you want to stay informed or just catch up on what's happening, we've got you covered. So, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on the latest news. Join the TeamSam TV family, and let's explore the world together, one update at a time.